Hello everyone, welcome to Think Outside the Board, and if you've been here before, then welcome back. This is a first impressions video for Kanban EV. So what that means is I've played the game a few times, both at a 2-player count and solo. I feel like I have a good grasp on the game, but I haven't played it extensively and I haven't played it at higher player counts yet. I also haven't used all of the little extras and mini expansions yet, so I don't feel like I have enough experience with the game yet to do a full teach and review, but I would like to show you the game's mechanisms and how they work and tell you what I think about the game so far. And that is what I do in these first impressions videos. So let's start with some statistics about Kanban EV first. It has a player count of 1 to 4. That means, yes, there is a solo game, and I've played it. It's co-designed by David Turksey, and it's good. I like it a lot. It's not one of those solo modes where it feels extraneous to the game, or it's trying to approximate a multiplayer count game and not really doing a good job of that. You know, some games want so hard to have a solo mode that they make one that doesn't really work that well. That is not the case for Kanban EV. As with Vital Lacerda's other games, the solo mode here is really, really good, and it's a solo mode I think you can come back to again and again and again, to the point that I think you could buy this game just for the solo game, if that's something that you wanted to do. And if you know Vital Lacerda's other games, that's true of most of his games. Now, the time on this is listed as 1 to 3 hours. I think that's a pretty good estimate if people know the game well, if there doesn't have to be a teach and people know what they're doing. In that case, I think it could get down to an hour for a 2-player game and maybe an hour for each additional player count. So I guess if we're trying to make a mathematical formula out of it, think of it as player count minus 1 equals the number of play hours. I think that's a pretty good estimate for players who know what they're doing and have some experience with the game. If you need to do a teach, throw in another hour. And then if you're playing with first-time players, you may need to extend the game length by 30 to 60 minutes to account for rules questions and people just trying to figure things out that they're not familiar with. Now, I'm really excited to be doing this video, and the reason for that is Vital Lacerda is my favorite designer. I love most of his games. Lisboa is my favorite game of all time. It's also obviously my favorite of his games. I'm just a huge Vital Lacerda fan, but I haven't done a video yet for any of his games, so this is going to be the first. So I'm super excited about that. If you don't know Vital Lacerda's other games, they include CO2 Second Chance, Escape Plan, The Gallerist, Kanban EV, Lisboa, On Mars, and Vinos Deluxe Edition. Now, he has a few other games that aren't within the top 1,000 at BGG, and those include Dragon Keepers, Mercado de Lisboa, and Railways of Portugal. I've personally never played Dragon Keepers. I know it's a very light game that he co-designed with his very young daughter, and I have a friend who had it briefly and then sold it. I'd like to play it at some point, but I don't think it is a representative of his other games. It's something he kind of did for fun as a lark with his daughter. But among his other games, I'm just going to quickly rank them now so that you know my preferences, and maybe that will help you make certain determinations. So I've already said that Lisboa is my favorite game of his. My next favorites of his, I think, include this one, Kanban EV, as well as On Mars, and I'm not really sure where those fit in relation to each other. I think I need to play them each a couple more times, but I think as of right now, they do occupy spots 2 and 3 on my list. That means CO2 Second Chance comes in 4th. I really, really love CO2 Second Chance, but I think it gets knocked down just a little bit because it is a cooperative game. It's always cooperative, so it's either fully cooperative or semi-cooperative. And if you're playing it semi-cooperative, there are points to be scored competitively. But to make it to that part of the game without the world ending, you really do need to play cooperatively for the first 2/3, 3/4 of the game. And so that is a little bit weird when you're playing a competitive game to kind of play cooperatively for the first big chunk of it, and then in the end be able to go off more on your own and do things that are just completely in your own self-interest then. And I think because of that switch that needs to happen and the fact that players need to be aware of that, I think it knocks a little bit off in my estimation, so it comes in at number 4. The problem with CO2 Second Chance is that if you're playing with even one player who just wants to completely play for their own self-interest starting from the beginning of the game, with that element happening, you won't make it to the end of the game. The world will end. And almost guaranteed the world will end and everybody will lose together. So that's just a little bit of a caveat for CO2 Second Chance, that if you are playing that in the semi-cooperative mode instead of the full cooperative mode, you still need to make sure that all players are going to be working together for the majority of the game. I think after that, I probably go to the Gallerist, which used to be a favorite of mine, but I've played it enough that it's getting a little bit more predictable to me, and it feels a little bit more like it's on rails to some degree, which is a strange comment to make about something with as much variability and complexity as a Vital Lacerda game. But I guess I've just played the Gallerist enough, and I think it is a lot more boxed in terms of what you can do with it. From there, probably Venos comes in next for me, Venos Deluxe Edition. And the reason it's so far down the list, I still like it. I really, really like it. I mean, all these games that I'm mentioning would score between 9s and 10s on my personal list. But Venos, I don't think it's as good as the others that I've mentioned. And it also has the distinction of being number 2 on my wine game list. So I really, really like Viticulture. And I think overall, I consider Vital Lacerda to be a better designer than Jamie Stegmaier. Nevertheless, I think Viticulture is a better game than Venos. In my opinion, Viticulture is Jamie Stegmaier's best design. And I really, really like the game. I like both wine games. I just think Viticulture is a little bit better, in my opinion. So that kind of results in Venos being lower on my overall Lacerda list as well. So it comes in right now at spot number, I think we're at 6. And then from there, we take a bigger jump down to Escape Plan. Escape Plan doesn't have all of the complexity of Vital Lacerda's games. You don't build your engine in the same way, but there are a lot of kind of fiddly elements of Escape Plan that you need to be aware of. So it does have a lot going on, just not as much of his other games. And there are ways in Escape Plan that you can really hurt yourself if you're not thinking forward enough and you don't have enough money to escape the city at the end if other players have escaped before you. It gets more expensive in Escape Plan the later on you leave the city. And I've played that game with several players who haven't understood that and or haven't planned for it. And then they get stuck at the end of the game not even being able to leave the city, which means they can't score points. They just kind of automatically lose. And I've seen a couple people be very upset about that. Now, I don't have a problem with it, but it does become a problem if you're playing games in game groups and things with people, and there's an element of the game that can be difficult for people to, I guess, take into account. It's also a little lower on the list just because I'm a heavier gamer, I love Vital Lacerda games, and Escape Plan is definitely lighter than most of his other games. After that, we go to Railways of Portugal, which I still enjoy it. I still enjoy Railways of Portugal, and I still enjoy Escape Plan. Vital originally designed a Portugal board for Age of Steam, and I think he took that board and that design and then used it to make Railways of Portugal, which is compatible with Railways of the World. So I like all of these games that I've mentioned. It's just Railways of Portugal isn't the best board for Railways of the World in my opinion, and it's got some really kind of fiddly elements in it. But I still do like Escape Plan and Railways of Portugal, even if they're not 9s and 10s the way the other games would be. And then my least favorite of his games is Mercado de Lisboa, which I probably would rate between a 5 to a 6. It takes elements of Lisboa and it tries to make a very lighter game, but I don't think there's too much game to it. I think that game kind of plays itself, and I don't think there are too many choices that players can really effectively make in Mercado de Lisboa. I think I own it. I backed the Kickstarter. I'm probably getting rid of it soon. I don't think I have a need to keep it. Originally, I was looking at it as using it to teach people certain elements of Lisboa, and then once they've grasped that, to then move on to Lisboa. I just don't think Mercado de Lisboa is good enough to hold on to it all. So that's a very short ranking of my Lacerda games, and you already know that I like Kanban EV based on that because I've already told you it's in my top 3 and that I would probably be rating it between a 9 and a 10. So that's all good for Kanban EV. That's obviously I enjoy and like the game. Now, the art on this is by Ian O'Toole, who, if you've played other Lacerda games, I'm sure you know him. He does all of the art on all of these really nice Eagle Gryphon Games editions of Lacerda's games. Almost all of them are by Ian O'Toole. And let's just list off all of his games that are in the top BGG, just so that if you've played any of them and you like his art, maybe you'll say, aha, maybe Kanban EV is for me then. So Ian has done the art on Age of Steam, Black Angel, the Clinic Deluxe Edition, CO2 Second Chance, Escape Plan, The Gallerist, Irish Gauge, Kanban EV, Lisboa, Merv, The Heart of the Silk Road, Nemo's War, 2nd Edition, On Mars, Pipeline, Ra, Stockpile, Unmatched, Cobble and Fog, and Venus Deluxe Edition. And Ian is right up there as one of my favorite artists, so I've got one of my favorite artists working with perhaps my favorite designer. I say perhaps because I think Vital Lacerda is my favorite designer in terms of designers who work alone for the most part, but I'm also a huge fan of the Mind Clash team, the central Mind Clash team that includes Richard Amon and Victor Peter. And they've designed games like Anachrony, Cerebria, and Turricarian, and those are also some of my favorite games along with Lacerda's, and probably Feudum by Mark Swanson. Anyway, let's talk about the games that Eagle Gryphon Games has published, because they're one of my favorite publishers, and they've designed a whole ton of games and a lot of these great Vital Lacerda editions. So the games in their publishing output that rank on BGG's top 1000 include Age of Steam, Baseball Highlights 2025, Brass Lancashire, Can't Stop, Carson City, Defenders of the Realm, Diamond, Empires, Age of Discovery, Escape Plan, Fleet the Dice Game, For Sale, Francis Drake, The Gallerist, High Society, Kanban EV, Lisboa, On Mars, Railways of the World, Rococo, Roll Through the Ages, The Bronze Age, Struggle of Empires, Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization, Through the Ages, A Story of Civilization, Tumblin' Dice, and Venus Deluxe Edition. So with all that said, to give you some background on the game, let's take a look now at the game itself, at the physical components and the mechanics and the way that the game plays, and then I will tell you what I thought of the game after a couple of plays as my first impression. Okay, so you are looking at the very large board for Kanban EV. This is actually a 6-section board, so it's huge. So I'm going to start this look at the board by talking about some of the things that are down here on the board that are tracks and various kinds of mechanics that you'll be using throughout the game. Then I will talk about each of these 5 departments separately, because essentially this is a worker placement game, and you've got 5 departments on the board over here. In the top, you've got research and development. This is where the cars get tested and the designs get implemented. Over here, you've got assembly. This is where the cars get pushed out of manufacturing and then go over to research and development. Over here, you've got logistics, and this is how car parts are created and how players get those car parts. And then they'll be using those car parts both to push cars out of manufacturing as well as to upgrade designs over here in R&D. Over here, you've got design. This is where players choose designs and take them onto their player board to be used later to either attain cards or upgrade plans. And then down in here, you've got administration. And then over here, we've got a meeting that will be set up at the beginning of the game with 4 topics that will be talked about in meetings. So when you start the game, Sandra, this is Sandra here, meet Sandra, she will be in her office for the player's very first turn. But then after that, as the game progresses, Sandra will, starting from the top and working her way to the bottom, go through each of these departments if they're available. So the very first move she's going to make is she's going to try to go to R&D. But if players have already taken these spots and she can't go in here, she'll just advance right to assembly. Now, when she goes to a department during her turn, her part of the game, she will evaluate that department. And essentially what that means is that if you are not certified in that department, and we'll talk more about that later, you'll be penalized. If you are not certified in the department, generally you have to have at least 3 items that are specific to the department. So when she's upgrading R&D, you need to have at least 3 upgraded designs. When she's evaluating assembly, you need to have at least 3 cars in your inventory. When she's evaluating logistics, you need to have at least 3 car parts in your inventory. When she's evaluating designs, you need to have at least 3 untested, not upgraded designs on your player board. And when she's evaluating administration, you need to be certified in at least 3 departments. Now, the only time those penalties are going to come into play is if you are last on the certification track. If you're not, you don't have to worry about it. If you are, you need to have those minimums I just mentioned. If you don't have those minimums, you will lose a point, and then you will lose an additional point for every banked shift you don't have under 5. For instance, that means if you had 5 banked shifts, you're just going to lose that 1 initial point. But if you only had 1 banked shift, then you're going to lose that initial point plus 4 more points for all of the banked shifts that you don't have under 5. So you would lose 5 points total. And that will happen basically every turn of the game as Sandra goes down and evaluates one department and then penalizes the person who is lowest in that department on the certification track. Then when Sandra gets back here to administration at the end of the work week, there will be an end of the week scoring, and that is represented by this track down here. That is a way for players to score the cars that they have in their player board as well as upgraded designs. It's not a lot of points. It's usually just a few points and less so at the beginning of the game when players have fewer things. But it is a way for players to get a small number of points, and it is also an end game trigger. So every time you have one of those end of the week scorings, this marker will advance 1 space. The other end game trigger is this track over here. Now, over the course of the game, players will be pushing cars out here. They'll go over here onto the R&D track, and then when players go into R&D, they can actually take the cars. Every time they take a car, this pace car will advance 1 space. It'll also move 1 space when Sandra does her evaluation here. Once this pace car has gone and crossed another striped spot, which means this space, which means it needs to, in a 3-player game, it needs to have advanced at least 1, 2, 3, 4 times, that will trigger a meeting. And a meeting is a way that players can score a lot of points. I'll talk more about this later, but at the end of that turn, they will have a meeting here on which they can score a lot of different points. And every time they have a meeting, this marker will advance. And then once one of these markers is on at least the 2 spot, and the other marker is on at least the 3 spot, so it could be the 2 there and the 3 here, could be the 2 there and the 3 there, that will trigger endgame. And then at the end of the game, there will be final scoring as well. So players will score points throughout the game by doing various things, getting bonuses here around the board, down here as well. You'll get points for that. You'll get a small amount of points in these end of the week scorings. You'll get a larger amount of points in the meetings, and you'll get a lot of points at the end in final scoring. So before I talk about the individual departments though, and those departments' certification tracks, let's talk about some of this stuff down here on the bottom of the board. So over here on the left is the recycling area. Now, players are always going to be wanting to get car parts to use to do things in assembly and over here in R&D with their designs, but there are 6 kind of car parts, and so you may not always have the right one or the one that you need. So there are 2 things in the game that can help with that. One are these parts vouchers. And whenever you have these parts vouchers, you can use them as a free action to just discard them and take the kind of car part that you want. But if you're short on those, you can always, as a free action, trade in a car part for another car part from recycling. So you're kind of switching one out for another part. You can only do that if the car part that you're trading in isn't already here in recycling. So you're basically giving one part to recycling that's not there and taking one part that is. And then that kind of cycles recycling, so there's always a different number of parts over here. But that gives you some ability to trade out the car parts that you have for other parts, and it gives you a little bit more freedom to do various actions in the game. Over here is the banked shift track. So you'll be getting bonuses throughout the game that will give you banked shifts. Every time you do that, you're going to use this little banked shift token. You'll place it on this track, and then at the end of the turn, you will advance your marker to account for any banked shifts that you got during that turn. The reason that you do at the end of your turn and you use this token is so that you don't take those banked shifts during the same turn that you got them. You're not allowed to do that. Over here we have Sandra's little office. Whenever she goes to administration, she's going to go to her specific office down here. And this is just a little iconography that tells you the scoring that happens during these end of the week scorings. Over here you have this track that tracks the end of the week scorings. And then all the way on the right over here, you've got an end game scoring tile. So this will determine what points are going to be scored at the end of the game during final scoring. And as you can see, the game comes with almost about a dozen of these. So there's definitely some good variability and replayability. You're not always going to be stuck with the same scoring tiles at the end of the game. And finally, around the edge of the board, you have the scoring track. Players will start at 15 points, and the reason that they do that is that they will be taking penalties, probably more so earlier in the game, and so that gives them the ability to not drop below 0 too quickly. They can take 15 points of penalties before they go below 0. Now, essentially, Kanban EV is a worker placement game. Even though it looks like there's a lot going on, players will be choosing these spaces here, and then they will get a certain number of shifts to work in that department. So it's kind of all about how you make these departments synergize together. And I'll tell you a little secret. It tends to be that as you go up, because the game does it so that whoever's at the top gets to go first, but the board is constructed almost so that as you go up, you kind of get the things you need to use at the department above that. So maybe you go over here into design, you get some plans, then maybe you go over here, you get some car parts, the ones that you know that you're gonna need for certain cars and to upgrade certain plans. Then once you have the right car parts, you go up to here, you push some cars out, they go over here into R&D, and then you go into R&D and you acquire some cars and you upgrade some designs. So it's interesting that there's a nice cycle of action that kind of goes upstream the way that the turn order goes. Now, the last thing that I want to show you on the board before I talk about specific departments is this track down here, which is the certification order track. And it's also the turn order track. So players have these little notepad markers, screen printed very nicely through the Kickstarter. And in pre-game setup, players are going to choose one of these spots in this opening orientation area, and this will be done randomly. So you'll have to figure out a random way to do this order, and once they do this, turn order will then be determined for the rest of the game. So let's say, just randomly, the purple player was going first, then yellow, and then blue. So the purple player would choose one of these bonuses. Now in general, the better bonuses are on the left side over here, but turn order will start at the right. So if you take the better bonus, you're going to go last. So if purple took this banked shift and got that banked shift, and blue took a book and got the book, and yellow took the spare parts voucher and received that spare parts voucher, then the game would start and turn order would now be going this way from right to left. So the yellow player would determine which department they want to go to. Let's say they decided to go down to design and they went in the larger 3-shift area. Let's say the blue player had the same idea, so he decided to go to design and he decided he would go in front of yellow and take that spot. And then let's say the purple player decided they're going to go to, well, maybe they're going to go here and get some car parts. And so then you would have your turn order for the first round, and it always goes top to bottom. So if we're doing this, purple would go first, then blue, then yellow. At the end of the round, purple would then choose where they go first, blue, and then yellow. So you'll maintain the turn order of this. When you do things in the game that aren't about this, you'll default to the turn order on here. Now, you may ask yourself, this is a little bit weird. Why is turn order going from right to left? Shouldn't it go from left to right? The reason for that is that as you get certified in the 5 different departments, Each time you do, you'll be able to advance your token to the next area and choose a bonus there. And again, wherever you go, the better bonuses are generally on the left and the higher turn order is on the right. But for instance, if yellow went here, even if they took the better bonus all the way on the left, they are still to the right of blue and purple. So when they're doing things that this turn order depends on, which generally has to do with these meetings and who goes first in the meetings, this yellow player is still going to be ahead of these guys who do not have as many certifications as yellow does. And that'll be consistent throughout the game. So you might get to a point where, the yellow player has 4 certifications, the blue player has 2, and the purple player has 1. And so the turn order will be yellow, blue, red, and it will start with the player who has the most, who's going to be the furthest to the right. So by keeping it with the right going first, that makes this consistent even when all of these tokens are in the same area of this certification turn order track. You've also got some little bonuses here over on the side, both on this certification turn order track and over here. And what these tiles mean is that the first player to get certified in 2 departments, as well as in 3 departments, and the first 2 players to get 3 cars in their garage, as well as the first player to get 5 cars in their garage, and the first 2 players to get 3 upgraded designs, as well as the first player to get 5 upgraded designs. In all those cases, the player who achieves those things will take one of these generic speech tokens. And this will allow them then to put one of their own colored speech tokens from their supply onto their player board. And those colored speech tokens are what are going to allow players to score these goals during the meetings. So just know these are here. As play continues throughout the game and players kind of hit these little achievements, these little benchmarks, they will get these speech tokens, which will allow them to score more points at those meetings. All right, let's talk about these departments now. Remember how I talked about how all of the actions kind of actually flow upward? I'm going to talk about these departments in reverse because I think it'll make more sense for you at home trying to understand this if I kind of go in reverse. But this is administration. This kind of doesn't really do anything on its own, so we'll come back to this at the very end, which means we're going to start here in this department, and this is design. As I talked about before, there's certification tracks in each of the 5 departments. And when players go to a department here, they're going to choose which space to go on, the 3 or the 2 shift. Now, obviously you want more shifts, so you want to go to the 3 shift space, but the danger in doing that is another player could take the 2 shift space in front of you and then get to take their turn before you and possibly do things that will interrupt what you had planned or make it impossible altogether. So there is a little bit of a danger when you go in the bottom, more powerful space because you could be jumped in line. Just know that. But let's talk about these certification tracks. So as you can see, there are 6 spaces on the certification track. It's like that in all the departments. And when you take a spot over here, you're going to either get 3 shifts or 2 shifts. Now, if you have bank shifts over here, you can always use bank shifts to work an extra shift in the game. However, you can only work up to 4 total shifts from these shifts and bank shifts put together. That means if you're in the 3 spot, you can only use up to 1 bank shift, and if you go in the 2 spot, you can only use up to 2 bank shifts. However, there are these books that you may acquire during the game. And these books are treated like research that you've done on your own time at home, knowledge that you've gained, and so it's a way to essentially give you an additional shift without taking the time to work the shift. And in that case, you can use as many books as you have during a turn, and that's a way that you can actually get many more shifts over 4. But anything over 4 has to come from those bonus books. So typically in a department, you're going to have 4 shifts because you'll be using hopefully these shifts and then enough bank shifts to make up the difference, and then extra shifts on top of that if you have those books. Now you can always use some of those shifts for training. And every one shift that you use for training will advance you one space on the certification track. Once you get to the 4th space, so you kind of cross over to the other level, you are now certified. And that's true in any department. And almost every department has some kind of bonus action that you can take once you're certified. We'll talk about that as we go over each department. If you get to the end of this track here, you are going to get this speech token, which you will use to place one of your colored speech tokens from your personal supply onto your player board, and then that will allow you to score more points during meetings. So you'll take that. You'll also look at all of the little bonus tiles that are there, and you'll choose one and put the rest back. If another player comes along later and gets to this point, they may have lost out on the speech token, but they will be able to choose one reward from the rewards that are left. And then as you can see at the end of the game, the player that is furthest along on the certification track is going to get 5 points. The next furthest is 3, the next furthest is 1. However, keep in mind that if another player gets to max certification after you, they will be considered to be ahead of you on this track now, which means if you race the tracks early on, you'll get the bonuses, but you may not get all of the endgame scoring points. You may be reduced from a 5 to a 3 or even a 1 if these players get there later in the game. So there's good reason to get there last. There's also good reasons to get there first, and it kind of just depends on what you need the most to happen during your game. But all of these certification tracks will work that same way. Now, in this department specifically, in design, when you go here, there is really one action that you can do besides the training, and that is to take a design. Now, in the start of the game, you're only going to be able to choose from these 8 designs right here. So you have to choose that. And if you choose either of the designs in this second column, you will also get a bonus of a bank shift. If you select either of the designs here in this first column, you will get a book. Anything that you get like this during your turn will go to the left of your player board, and then once your turn is done, they will move onto your player board and you'll be able to use them on a later turn. You're going to be doing some combination of training and taking designs. And the designs don't refill as you take them. So if you take, this one, and I would also get a bank shift, and maybe I took this one as a book, and then maybe the third shift was used to go up the training, and then if I had a bank shift, maybe I'd use that to go up the training once more. So that's kind of like what you'd be doing here in design. And then at the end of your turn, all of these designs would move out to the right like this, and these will refill from these 2 big stacks. And if either of these stacks ever run out, these will refill from this stack. Now, if you are certified here in design, you can do this action. That means that you have to be certified. And this one will allow you to not only take designs from these 8 spaces, but you can also take any designs you want off the top of these 3 stacks. So it's not really a different action so much as it is a more powerful action. But this is the way that you're going to get designs on your player board, and you can get some bonuses when you do that. Now let's look over here at logistics. Again, logistics has a training track that you can go up, but there are 2 actions that you can do in logistics. The first one is you're going to start your game. Everyone will start the game with 2 of these Kanban cards, which have goods on them. So you'll pick one of these Kanban cards if you're doing this action. You're going to place it here on this space, and you'll notice there's a big line going across the middle of the board here. The idea here is when I place this, I'm going to get to put car parts into any of these car part storage areas that are on the same side. So for instance, if I were to put this here, I'm going to place these 2 here. I'm going to get a pink one here, and I'll get a green up here and a red up here. I will not, however, place the blue one because it's not on the same side as the car part space. But I could place it this way. And if I did it this way, I'm still going to get the 2 here. I'm still going to get the green and the red to go in these spaces. But the difference is now the pink won't go here because it's on the wrong side of this line, but the blue will go there. So you can do this action, and this is just a way of filling up more car parts. So if I did this, we'd put these car parts out like this. and we'd refill the car parts in these car part areas. And then this card would go away back in the deck, and you would take a new card so that you always have 2. So that is that action. The second action you can do is to take all of the good from any one section. So maybe I just take both of these car parts and I put them on my player board. That also costs a shift. Now the bonus action here, once you're certified, is that for 1 shift you can take a spare parts token. And this is the one that's going to go off your player board. Once your turn is done, it will come onto your player board, and then you can discard it whenever you want for any car part of your choice from the supply over here off the board. Now up here we have assembly, and this is one of the places where you're going to start to use those car parts. So you're going to push cars out, and the reason that you're going to do this is you need to get cars into your garage eventually. And how do you do that? Well, you get some car parts, you push some cars out. Once they're out here, they're going to go over into R&D, and once they're in R&D, you'll be able to go into R&D with one of those designs that you got down here in design, and you'll be able to take the car. So it all starts here, really, in assembly. So you're going to take any those car parts that you have in your player board, and you can use them to push out cars. So let's say I decided to push out one of these blue cars. I could put my car part token on here, and I'm going to add a blue car, and it's going to push everything down on the assembly line. So essentially, this goes here, this goes here, and then all of these spots that are kind of like on a diagonal where you have a choice, you can choose whether this car gets pushed here or whether the car gets pushed down here into this space and then pushes the green car along. Now, this is a little puzzle all on its own. And the reason that you may do this in different ways and choose different spaces may be that you're trying to get a very specific kind of car to come off the line and go over here in R&D. And that's one way you can do that. Also though, if you push out a car over here in this main section, you're going to get 2 points instantly. If you push it out on one of these side tracks, you'll only get 1 point. So there is a decision to be made there, but it's only a 1 point difference. So you're going to place car parts down here, and you're going to push out as many cars as you want. Each one takes a shift. So you're just going to keep doing this, and when you're done, you will end your turn. So maybe I'm doing this and pushing this, and I get 2 points, and this green car goes over here. Now, the other thing is, if I've pushed out a car that corresponds to one of these cars, I will also get one of these generic speech tokens. And if they ever run out, they'll go off the board, and then we'll shuffle up these tiles, and you'll get a new tile that comes out. So that is the only action that you can do in assembly. It's all about just moving these cars off. And when you're certified here, that doesn't change anything. There is no extra action that you can do in assembly. It is just that action. But one thing that you should know is if you ever come to assembly, before you start taking your turn, if there are cars that have all of their track completely filled up with car parts, those will all get removed before you start your turn, and that's what that means. Now let's talk about R&D over here. So when you go here, you have 2 different things you can do. You can either choose to take a car behind the pace car, and let's say we've got a few more cars over here like this. You'll only ever have 4 cars here. If you have more than 4 cars here, the cars that are in the lead will go away and the other cars will be brought in to fill the spaces. But you can use a certain number of shifts to buy cars, and it's right here. So if you're taking the car that's directly behind the pace car, that's going to cost 1 shift. If you're taking either of the cars second or third behind the pace car, it will cost you 2 shifts. And if you're taking the car that is 4 spaces behind the pace car, that will cost you 3 shifts. Which means, in general, you're only ever going to get to take 2 cars, probably, when you go to R&D. And of course, you can also go up the training track. Now, R&D also does not have an advanced action that you can take when you're certified, and I think that maybe the reason is each of these 5 departments also unlocks something on your player board. And I believe that the actions that R&D and assembly unlock are a little more powerful than the ones that logistics, and design unlock, which is why I think you don't get an action. So when you certify, you're either getting a really powerful player board upgrade, or you're getting a less powerful player board upgrade, but a bonus action that you can take in that department. Now, the other thing that the player can do over here in R&D is they can upgrade a design. So remember down here in design when they picked up these designs, they look like this. Most of them have some kind of car part on the side, as well as a picture of a certain type of car. Some of them just have an X there. That means that that design can only be used to obtain you the car, because when you get a car, you need to have the matching design. You're going to turn it in, and it will go to the bottom of the stack over here in design. But the other thing you can do with these plans is you can upgrade the design. So you have to have the matching car part. So I would need to have this beige car part in my inventory. And the other thing that I could do is I could spend a shift to upgrade this part. So I would flip over this design, and it would come off of my player board's desktop. It would go onto the side where you keep upgraded designs. And then later, if you get a car of this type, a gray car, you will then slide this upgraded plan over on top of the car in your garage, and it will become a tested plan, and that can then score you points at the end of the game, as well as in end of the week scoring. When you do that, when you upgrade a design though, you're going to take that car part that you needed. Remember, in my case, I needed this beige one. And you're going to place it somewhere in this area here. It was designed for the gray car that I was upgrading, so I'm going to place this car part on one of these 6 spaces. Sometimes there's bonus points, sometimes there's bank shifts, sometimes there's these books, these homework books. And I'll just place the car part there, and I'll immediately get those points, or whatever bonus I take. When I do that, this car part marker is going to go up this track. So the more players upgrade with the same type of car part, the more the car part will advance along these tracks. And then wherever it ends up at the end of the game, that will act as a multiplier for scoring when players are scoring their upgraded designs at the end of the game. So this is just a way that players will be able to track all of these car parts. And another thing about having these car parts committed to these designs is that once this is on here, when players are in assembly, if they want to push the gray card forward, they have to use any of the car parts that have been upgraded in the design first. So before a player can put any kind of car part there, they'll need to use the beige part first, when the beige part is the only part over here. If there were a bunch of parts, they could pick from those parts that were upgrades, but it would have to be one of those parts, and all of those different parts would need to be represented here before players could start using parts that weren't on the upgraded design. Another way all of these departments are interconnected. Now last, let's talk about administration down here. One thing you'll notice is that administration actually has fewer shifts than the other departments. So all of the other departments are 2 and 3 shift spaces, but administration is 1 and 2. So that's just an interesting little thing to note. But the other thing about administration is there's nothing you can actually do here except go up the administration track. The reason for that is you can choose one other department, and you can work in that department and take actions in that department. And because you're going last in turn order that round, you don't have to decide which department you're going to go to until all the other players have already taken their turns. So you can let things happen on the board and in the board state and see where it all goes, and then you can decide to make your move. So you'll be able to split your time between training in administration and taking actions and training in another department. So you could do training in administration and do training in some other department that you've chosen to work in. And this is also a great way of doing this, that you can take actions in a department that already has people using both of the worker placement spots. So if you really need to get in there, this will allow you to do that. Those are each of the 5 departments. So players are going to be getting designs, they're going to be getting car parts, they're going to be pushing cars over here into R&D, and then they'll be getting upgraded, designs and cars and putting them on their player boards. Okay, so you know how all the 5 different departments work, and I think you probably have a little bit of a feeling from the way I've described it about how the departments kind of work together and how they feed each other. So let's talk about the various kinds of scoring that are going to happen. The first one, the very insignificant one, is this end of the week scoring. So whenever players do this, they're going to look at the cars in their garage. And for all of the cars in the garage, they're going to get a point for every upgraded design that's on a car. And they'll also get a point for every upgraded part that's over here that's on cars that they have in their garage. So the meetings will happen every time this pace car goes halfway around the track and lands or passes another striped space. And then you're going to get to this meeting. And players are going to have 3 of these weekly meeting cards in their hand. And they will have been looking at these, figuring out one that they may want to use during the meeting. Because players are not only going to score all 4 goals that are already out here, they will also each add one of these from their hand into this meeting. So maybe I want to score the card that rewards me for having cars in garages 4 and 5 on my player board. Maybe I want to score the plans that are upgraded with this aqua car part, if I have upgraded it and tested parts. Or maybe I'm just going to want to score for all the parts voucher tokens I have on my player board. In any case, I'm going to have to add one of these to the meeting. But in any meeting, player order will happen in the turn order of these certification tokens. So the way it is here right now, yellow would go first, then blue, then purple. So a player would look at these goals, and then using the colored speech tokens they have on their player board, they'll choose one to score. So if I'm playing the purple player, maybe I'm going to want to score for all the gray cars in my garage. And you'll see that some of these have multipliers on it. And players will just go in turn order. Now, players can pass, but before you pass, you have to have laid out one of your cards. And you don't even have to put a speech token on it, but you can. And if you have something that you've been planning to score, because you've known all along that you have it, you may just put it out and then put your token on it right away. But you don't have to. You could not score it at all. Now, once you have placed a card, once the turn order kind of comes back around to you, you can pass if you have nothing else that you can score. However, if you pass and then players keep scoring these, you can jump back in later and start playing speech tokens again. But once all the players have passed each in one kind of loop of turn order, then the meeting will end. And players will get the points for all of the things that they've scored, and then at the very end of the meeting, all of those meeting goals will go away, as well as the ones that players added. Players will now have 2 cards left in their hand. They'll have to choose one of them to put down for the next meeting. After they've done that, they'll then refill their hand till 3 cards. And once all players have added goals, if there are any goals left, like if you're playing a 3-player game, you would put the last goal out there from the deck. But that way you will always have 4 goals here visible for everyone, and each player will have 3 more goals in their hand, knowing that one of them will be played during the next meeting, and then a second card will be played at the end of the meeting for the following meeting. Now, as we said before, once you have one of these on 2 and one of these on 3, the end game will be triggered. And that means that at the end of that turn, final scoring will happen. So during final scoring, players are going to get a lot of points for kind of extra things. They'll get a point for every speech token that's still on their player board. They'll score a point for every banked shift they have. They'll score a point for every book or parts voucher on their player board. They'll score points for each car that they have in their garage. And each of these cars is worth a different number of points. They're worth 2 to 6 points, depending on which type of car it is. But it says how many points are on your player board, so that's something that you can always consult while you're playing the game. Finally, players will score for their positions on the various certification tracks. There are 5 of them. So you'll get 5 points for each track where you're in first place, 3 points for each track where you're in second place, and 3rd place for each track where you're in 3rd place, with the one caveat being that you have to have trained at least once. So you have to do something in that department to qualify for the end of the game bonus. You can't just sit there at 0 and do nothing. So after you've scored for the cars that are in your garage, so if you have a car in your garage that has a lot of upgrades on it, you may be scoring a lot of bonus points for all of those car parts at the end of the game. You will also score points for each tested design that has been placed over a car on your player board. You will score however many points that upgrade is now worth based on how much it's been upgraded over the course of the game. So for instance, if I had this design upgraded with this aqua car part on a concept car, one of these black cars, if I had that in my garage, at the end of the game, that car part is going to score 6 points because that's where the aqua one is. Now, if I had several concept cars in my garage, I'm going to score 6 points for each of those cars because this design will be relevant to each of those cars. So there's a lot of points to be scored for designs at the end of the game if the right car parts have been advanced enough. Now, the one last thing I'd like to show you before I finish with this part of the video is the player board. So this is what the player board looks like, and it's going to come with a lock in 5 different places. Each place represented by one of the departments, and each time you're certified in that department, you will then remove the lock from the board, and you will then have access to that feature. So for here, this is the upgrade down here for logistics, which is where you get car parts, which means once you're certified in logistics, you now can have another car part in your inventory. So instead of having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you could now hold 6. Design will allow you to hold an extra design. Administration will allow you to hold another speech bubble. And again, that's what you're going to be using to score meeting points during meetings. So very related to administration. Over here, you're going to have an unlock for R&D. And this is a one-time use tile. So once you're certified in R&D, you're going to flip this tile over. And this will now give you a double use when you're upgrading car parts. So you remember that action when you take a design and you make it into an upgraded design and you use a car part. And when you do that, that car part is going to upgrade. Well, if you activate this, you're going to upgrade it 2 spaces. And then you have a special bonus that when you do that, you will actually get the points for the second space you upgraded to. Now you can only do this once per game. So once you've done it, you're going to flip that back over and then you've lost that ability. Also, each car part can only be upgraded doubly like that once per game. So each car part token has a darker side. And when you do that action, you will flip the car part token over, and that way other players know that when they go to use their double upgrade action, if they're certified, they're going to have to do it with a different car part token. And then finally, being certified in assembly will allow you to unlock a 5th garage spot. So let's talk about the player board here. These are the garage spots right here. And whenever you get a car from R&D and you put it in a garage spot, you're immediately going to get that bonus. So maybe you're getting a speech token, maybe you're getting 2 books, maybe you're getting 2 parts voucher tokens, or 2 banked shifts, or over on this one, you get to choose 2 of these goods. So you can take any combination of a generic speech token, banked shift, parts voucher token, and book. So here's your garage. These are the speech tokens that you're going to use during the meeting. And whenever you get one of these white generic speech tokens during the game, you'll put it down here. And if you have available spaces, you'll just immediately discard it and then place one of your own speech tokens onto your player board. And then later in the meeting, you're going to be using the tokens here so that you can score those meeting goals. Also at the very end, in endgame scoring, remember how we had these end of the game scoring tokens? These get scored in final scoring. But to score these, you also need to use one of your colored speech tokens for endgame scoring at the end of the game. So keep in mind, you will need to save some of these speech tokens if you want to participate in endgame scoring for those bonuses. Over here, you keep parts voucher tokens and books, and these will score 1 point at the end of the game if you have extras. You'll also score 1 point at the end of the game if you have extra generic speech tokens. And finally, when you're upgrading these designs, when you go over to R&D and you pay that parts voucher, you're going to take it and put it over here, and you now have an upgraded design. And then later when you acquire a matching car, so in this case a truck, if I already have a design over here, it's just going to come over here and slot in on top of that truck, and now this will score more points at the end of the game. Also, whenever you upgrade these designs, you're going to get the 2 points that it shows on them. So that is Kanban, and it may look complicated on a first look, but the great thing about Vital Lacerda's games is that the theme is so strong that the more you play them, the more you'll have understanding of why certain mechanics work together and how they work together. And it makes it more intuitive the more and more you play it. I did a first impressions video recently on Merv, and I like the game Merv, but it doesn't have that same kind of thematic integration. So a lot of the little fiddly rules in Merv never become intuitive in the same way. And so even though Kanban is a heavier game, it's a much heavier game, in my own head it feels simpler because everything makes sense and kind of integrates well. Whereas with Merv, which is kind of generally a lighter game, it's more of like a medium to medium heavy game, a lot of those little kind of fiddly extra mechanics don't really have a good thematic integration. So it's easier to forget why something works the way that it does, or even forget that it's there. In Kanban, that's less likely to happen. All right, so I've already run with the lead and told you that I love this game. It's by my favorite designer. I really, really do like specifically this game and the way everything kind of is implemented together. Let's start talking about on a design level. So I generally like Vital Lacerda in general. And part of that has to do with how he integrates theme into his games. I think Lacerda games are the games that I've played the most where the integration of theme feels intuitive, and when you take certain actions in the game, it makes sense with the thematics. I also think that Vital designs games that have a very fun and smart build to them if you're playing them right and you get in a good groove with them. So I've noticed that in Kanban EV, when you look at the board, the actions kind of go from top to bottom. And I talked about this in the teach. But it seems like the best way to order the actions in general are that kind of swimming upstream way, going from bottom to top, because you need the designs to take the cars, and you need the car parts to push the cars along in the assembly line, and then you need those cars there in R&D to pick up some cars, perhaps at the same time that you're improving some designs. So it does very much feel to me that the order that you're going to want to be going in general is kind of going from bottom to top along those worker placement sections. And if you get into a nice groove where people aren't blocking you too much, and maybe you're using the admin area if you need to, Lacerda games have a very nice build to them. So as you're doing things right, when things are working, there's such a nice flow, and it feels good in a way that I think other games, it's hard for them to get to that place. It just feels really good the way that you're kind of building this engine. And when you're doing well, you're constantly saying, okay, I've done this. How can I get more points for the end? And there are all these ways to score points. So if you can't quite do something that you need for the end game scoring, you can kind of focus on the meeting goals that are going to be coming up for the next meeting. And if you're having trouble with that, maybe you go for some specific points. And there are always choices to be made in terms of getting banked shifts and building those up early in the game so that you don't get dinged on certification, and also just getting yourself certified so that you're not getting penalized when Sandra comes and does those certification checks. But I really, really like the flow of the game. Now, it's also true that in Lacerda games, and this is true of any game, that if you're not doing well and you get yourself stuck into a corner, sometimes the game can get away from you a little bit, and it's hard to make good choices once you're painted into a corner and you're just trying to stop the bleeding, essentially. But to me, that's part of the fun of the game, is how to not let that happen, and if it does happen, how to try to recover yourself. It does take a familiarity with the game to be able to do all those things and do them well. So that means that you have to learn the game, and it is a heavier game, so there's a barrier to entry for some gamers. And even once you know the game, I think you need to play it a few times to really kind of get good at it and know when you need to zig one way and when you need to zag the other way. For me, his games are some of the most thematic, and they integrate theme in such a way that it just feels intuitive. And the more that you play his games, the more you see, oh, we're doing this here because of that, and that works in with the theme because of that, and that's so cool. I mean, that happens to me all the time when I play Lacerda games, and it doesn't happen very much with other games. So it's one of the reasons that I love his games so much. There's such an intelligence and thoughtfulness to the design, and the way that the engine kind of works with itself. It's just very compelling and a lot of fun for me. And on the art front, we've got Ian O'Toole. I've already mentioned that he's one of my favorite artists. I love his design sensibility, and when he works on the art for a game, he does the graphic design as well. So you're getting the whole package. I did a review recently for Merv, and Ian also did the art on that. And I said that in Merv, the art can be a little bit busy, and it can almost make your eyes cross a little bit. And I think some of that has to do with the fact that Ian just went crazy on the art in Merv, as he usually does. But Merv doesn't have some of the same thematic attachments as Lacerda games. So when you're playing Merv, some of the little kind of like fiddly rules and rules that play off of rules, the rules in the game, they just don't have a thematic purpose. And so Merv can actually seem like a heavier game than it is because those rules and those mechanisms don't function as intuitively. And once you're playing the game, that intuitiveness in the actions and in the way the game works thematically will really carry you along and help remind you of things or give you explanations about how things work in the very doing of them. So Merv, for me, it didn't have those things built into the design. And so there was only so much Ian could do with kind of the integration of the art. And I think consequently in Merv, the art does look a little bit busy. And even though there's a lot going on and there's 5 different departments, and if you don't know the game, if you don't know the rules, you're looking at that board, it may look very busy. But once you learn the rules and you kind of understand them, everything in the board fits together and makes sense, and it does not become very confusing to look at. And I love Ian's artwork. I think he did a great job in Kanban EV. I personally have not played the original edition, which was called Kanban Drivers Edition. It had a different artist on it. I know some things were changed. For instance, I think originally when you went into meetings, instead of using speech bubble tokens, there was something else. And I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but I have heard other people saying that it was a little fiddly and didn't work as well, and this update help to correct that and make the game run more smoothly and feel better. And so I can't personally speak to some of those changes, but I have heard from other people that they like the changes. They think that the new version is better. Now, normally I'd also talk about the integration of theme, but I think I already did that when I was talking about design. So I'm just going to move on to longevity and replayability. And this game is got it. The solo mode is great. If you're buying it for the solo mode, I think you have almost unlimited replayability with that. I do have the Kickstarter version, so when I showed you the game, those were the metal cars. I probably wouldn't recommend getting them. The wooden cars are just as good, and they're much, much cheaper. I think if you go to buy the metal cars now, it's $80 just for the cars. So unless you have money to throw away, I wouldn't recommend to do that. I mean, they're nice. They feel nice in the hand. They have some weight to them. They could also damage the board over time because they are metal and they do have weight to them. And I don't think you'll have that problem with the wooden cars. And really, we're talking about superficial, differences. So just get the wooden cars. But as far as this replayability goes, I think it's got it. I think it's got replayability until the cows come home. There's also 2 mini expansions that you can get that are packaged together. One just gives you different tiles that you can use on your player board, and the other one has kind of a new mechanic. It's called the Supercharger expansion, and it works on the side of your player board, and it gives you kind of another mechanic with another resource that you can do and things that you can kind of supplement the way you're constructing the cars. So if you want more replayability, I would definitely get those little mini expansions. Now, the game seems to be sold out everywhere, but you can get it through Eagle Gryphon Games' website. You can also get the mini expansion there, and if you want the metal cars, you can get those there as well. But if you are looking for the game and you're only seeing these kind of jacked up secondhand prices on Amazon or on eBay, just go to Eagle Gryphon Games' website. They have the game there. I think it's selling at $130 right now. And I think whether you're playing the solo game or a multiplayer game, There is a lot of variability in the game, in the design of the game. You've also got those 2 little mini expansions that you can throw in, and there's several different variants you can use as well. For instance, in the original Kanban Driver's Edition, Sandra, who evaluates you, was nice, and she would reward you for doing things. And then there was a mean Sandra variant that was more punishing. They've kind of flipped that around on this game. So the base game now uses the mean Sandra where you're getting punished if you aren't certified. But there is a variant with nice Sandra, and you can use that in this game and get rewarded instead of getting punished. And there are several little variants like that you can throw into the game when you want, if you want even more variability. But I think because of the way the game plays, there's a lot of variability and replayability built into it. And this should be one of those Euros, as like most of Vital Lacerda's games, where you don't have to worry so much about the game running dry or running stale. It's going to last a very, very long time. Now, in terms of what the game does well, I've kind of already touched on that as well. I just like Vital's design. I like Ian O'Toole's art. Those are both huge strengths for me. The game is, I guess I haven't really mentioned this yet, but it is a worker placement game primarily. However, you will be doing things like action selection. And the reason I'm kind of separating that out is because once you choose a space to go into as a worker placement spot, you still, in that department, have some choices in terms of what you're going to do. So you can still make a choice as to whether you're going to train, whether you're going to do the main action in that department, or if there's a secondary action, maybe you're doing that as well. Some combination. So that's why I'm calling it action selection in addition to worker placement. And then you've got some hand management going on, both with your Kanban cards, although those don't really require much thinking, but there will be more thinking in terms of those goal cards and when you're going to pull those out. If you're going to play those in a early meeting or save them for a later meeting that hopefully will happen. The game has 2 different triggers for endgame. So in the games that I've seen, there really aren't that many meetings. 2 usually. I think it's a lot harder to get 3 meetings in because Sandra in her evaluations will hit the end of the week 3 times, I think fairly quickly. So the only way you'll probably get a 3rd meeting in is if you have a bunch of players rushing to R&D and taking a lot of cars and moving that pace car around the track and triggering the meetings. But I think in most games, if people aren't doing that, it's more likely that you'll end up having 2 meetings and 3 end of week scorings. And I just really, really like the design of the game. I like the gameplay. I like the flow of the game, which is why it's already shot up right kind of on line with On Mars for me and right behind Lisboa. I just want to keep playing it. It's so good. I just want to play it over and over again. It's a really good game. Now, in terms of weaknesses of the game, I don't really have too many. I guess the price tag on the metal cars, I mean, that's an insanely high price for a cosmetic item that you don't really need. But if you're a completist, if you like his games, you may feel like you need to get those metal cars. So I think the fact that they are as expensive as they are is a negative in my opinion. Other than that, the only real negative I think to the game is the high complexity level, and that will keep some gamers away from it. And a part of me thinks that's too bad because I'd like everyone to be able to experience and enjoy this game. Some gamers don't really want to play heavy games. They don't enjoy them. That's not what appeals to them. So if you don't like heavy Euros, this is probably not for you. But I will say that this game feels lighter than it is. So the complexity level of Kanban EV right now on BGG is 4.33, which is really high. And I know that's going to be intimidating to a lot of people. But as far as I'm concerned, the game does not feel that heavy. It may be a little bit at the beginning, it may feel heavy. There's a lot of information. But once you understand that it's a worker placement game, it's got 5 departments, and you kind of understand the flow from department to department, and then you also get your head around the certifications and Sandra, and you understand the meetings, that's not that bad. I mean, it's still, I'm laughing because maybe that sounds overwhelming to people, but it's really not that bad. I mean, worker placement games to me, in general, are fairly simple. And so you've got a designer like Lacerda, he uses worker placement a lot, and he's able to do a lot of kind of complex things, grafting those things onto this simpler design. And generally, it's just a lot of kind of little extra fiddliness. what kind of tempers that, in my opinion, is the way that those little extra rules all integrate with theme to make them so intuitive. So to me, once I learn the game and play it a little bit, even just a little bit, it slides down the complexity scale and gets a lot easier very quickly. To get to that point, you have to learn the game and play it once or twice, and then I think it won't be so intimidating. But I don't find it anywhere near as complicated as any other game that you'd maybe see in the 4s. And going along with that, I mean, who's not going to like this game? Or what, the question, what are people not going to like about this game? I think it's just complexity. People who are not ready for this game are going to be overwhelmed by the complexity. And I think that just falls under, this game is not for everybody. You should know that as someone who loves heavy games and someone who really likes Lacerda games, I'm putting this at the top of that list. So that should be a huge vote of confidence for anyone else who likes heavier games or Lacerda games, knowing that as a fellow Lacerda lover, this one is instantly rising to the top for me. So I think that's all I have to say about Kanban EV at this time. If I had to give it a rating, I think I'd give it a 10. I would give it a 10. I don't have that many. Maybe I have 10 games that I've rated a 10. A lot of them are Lacerda games, and a lot of them are Mind Clash games. I think up in there you might find Feudum is up there. City of the Big Shoulders is pretty high. Maybe some of the games from Chip Theory games. And I really like Flotilla a lot too, as well. So those are some of my favorite games. So this one's going to get a huge recommendation from me. And I have to assume that I will be back later in the future with a full teach and review, because Lacerda is my favorite designer. Before I do that, though, I do have plans coming up in the next few months to upgrade a lot of cameras and the way I'm doing things visually, and I'll probably wait until you're seeing Think Outside the Board 2.0 with some better elements to it and some better cameras before I go and do a full teach and review of Kanban EV, because I'd like it to look as nice as possible. So that's a little ways off, but down the line, I think at some point within the next year or two, and in general in a few months, once I have new cameras in and I'm sort of working in a new format, I think you'll see most of those Lacerdas get a full teach and review treatment in that next year or two. One last thing, if you are thinking about this game, I've kind of mentioned it a little bit in here, but I'm seeing that Kanban EV is pretty much sold out everywhere, and it's being jacked up right now on eBay and Amazon. So if you do want to get the game, you can get it through Eagle Gryphon Games' website. I believe they're selling the base game there for the MSRP, which is $130. Might be $120. You can also get those little mini expansions for $10, or just kind of the bundle that's $10 more with the base game. And you can also buy the metal cars if you want them for $80, or you can bundle everything together and it's $90 more than the base game if you're getting the cars and the mini expansions together. So you can get it there. If you are excited and you're looking for places to buy the game, I would say just go get it from Eagle Gryphons directly. I don't know when it will be back in stock everywhere else. Thank you very much for making it all the way to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed learning about Kanban, and I hope I gave you some food for thought and helped you make a decision about whether this is a game for you and if this is something that you want to buy. If it's your first time here, please consider liking and subscribing. That's how I grow my channel, and that's how I'm able to continue to produce video content like this in the future. So if you want to see more videos like this, like and subscribe. And then you can also hit the alarm bell if you want to be notified right when I publish videos in the future. Other than that, I hope you are playing games whatever way you can these days. I know it's tough. Some of us are playing solo more than we did in the past, or playing with 1 or 2 dedicated gaming friends. And now that things are starting to open up again, we'll hopefully be getting back to playing larger, more multiplayer games. I know this coming weekend, I'm having some friends over for a game day for the first time in over a year and a half. We're all vaccinated. There's only 3 of us, so we're not going to wear masks, but that's a first. That's the first time in a year and a half. So as you out there are also trying to figure out how you're going to navigate this post-COVID world with gaming, best of luck to you. Just play as many good games as you can in whatever way you can. Thank you again for joining me for this video, and I will see you next time. Take care. Goodbye. Have a great week.